welcome to the show. How do you tell the story of one of humanity's most devastating conflicts in a way that is both historically accurate and deeply human? Today we explore that challenge with historian Jan Szkudliński, curator of the main exhibition here at the Museum of the Second World War in Gdańsk. Hello and welcome, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Hello.
So the permanent exhibition is divided into three broad narrative blocks, and these are the road to war, the terror of war, and the long shadow of war. How did you decide on these themes?
This kind of division was necessary in order to allow the visitors to progress smoothly through all the 16 sections of the exhibition. This division simplifies the task of seeing this mammoth exhibition because it's one of the largest, if not the largest historical exhibition in Europe. It covers over 6,000 square meters, and well, if you wanted to read all the printed captions and all the documents and materials that are included in multimedia screens, it is nearly 1,500 pages of text, and that's just Polish version. The museum is completely bilingual, Polish and English.
So we're talking about a Polish perspective here in a sense. So how to balance, the national narrative with the international perspective?
We were keenly aware when preparing this exhibition, when the preliminary documents were written by Professor Machcewicz over nearly 20 years ago now, that the memory of the Second World War in Poland and Central and Eastern Europe and in the Western world in general is very different. We were aware that the Iron Curtain, which had divided the world, Europe, for a few generations even, for many decades, has likewise divided the memory of the war. So we needed to include the sections about the second aggressor in 1939, because for the world in general, what was remembered was that Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and then Great Britain and France joined the conflict, thus starting the Second World War. And then, after a wave of German successes, the Grand Alliance of including Soviet Union defeated Nazi Germany and brought about liberation. And that's how the war was remembered in the West. In Poland and in Central and Eastern Europe, the story was and is, of course, very different. That in 1939, having colluded together, both dictators, Hitler and Stalin, invaded various countries and conducted hideous crimes. We were aware that we need to point out and stress the fact that despite the way the war is remembered in the West, that the war of annihilation started on 22nd of June 1941 with Hitler's invasion of Soviet Union, the truth was and is that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany conducted those crimes here starting from 1939. That Nazi Germany conducted war against Poland with racial brutality, which was quite similar to what would transpire later in 1941. And of course that for the inhabitants of Poland, inhabitants of Central and Eastern Europe, many countries like Baltic states, like Finland, like Romania, Soviet Union was another aggressor, there was another occupation, and there were, for example, mass deportations and mass shootings of people, chief and foremost of which was the Katyn massacre.
It is extremely complex indeed. What extent, what role does the interactive content play?
When we started creating this museum, we were thinking that many things will need to be substituted with multimedia content, because we were aware that back in 2009 many exhibits have already been passed to institutions and are shown in various exhibitions, various museums. So we were afraid that it would be necessary to create a museum which would tell things and show things on screens without concentrating so much on single objects. But the reality proved to be much more encouraging to us. We conducted a few collections of exhibitions. We were asking around in various institutions whether they would not be willing to donate something to this peculiar exhibition, special exhibition, which is very different from other museums. So we were able to illustrate every story which is shown here with objects, with original objects which were either donated by people who were using them in wartime or are the same as the objects that were used in wartime. Sometimes when the topic was extremely important, like, for example, the success of Polish code breakers in breaking the Nazi German Enigma coding machine. We designed a room which would be showing only one object, and we managed to obtain it. The Enigma machine in this museum was donated for this exhibition by the military museum, a Norwegian military museum in Oslo, Norway.
You've mentioned that the museum is quite a popular place. I wanted to ask you about the audiences. Who visits the museum?
We were designing this exhibition chiefly to tell the story of Poland, of Central Eastern Europe, this kind of different story of the Second World War to outsiders. And we think that we managed to attract them in sufficient numbers. Judging from various sources, various methods of testing, we know that about 40% of our visitors are foreigners, chiefly coming from the neighboring countries of Europe, but not only. The museum is visited frequently by practically every tourist that visits Gdańsk. It's listed among one of the chief attractions, and we are continuously expanding the number of languages in our audio guide simply because people are asking us that we would do so.
And the museum is also housed in a very unique building. Can you tell us a little bit more about the building itself?
Yes, we created the concept of the exhibition itself. So first, the designers of the exhibitions were selected in an international competition. The winning project was delivered by a Belgian company, Tempora. And then we organized the architectural competition for the building itself. There were 129 proposals from across the globe. There were even designers from Indonesia. However, the winning design proved to be the one from Gdynia, just to the north of Gdańsk, which fit best the local conditions and the other monuments that could be seen. And the idea, which unfortunately is becoming less and less valid in current world, was that war is located in the section of the building which is hidden underground, 14 meters underground to be precise, whereas this inclining tower in which we are sitting now provides the view on the rebuilt city of Gdańsk, houses the library, the educational department, and the restaurant with a view on the rebuilt city, with the hope that war is in the past and future is hopeful and full of, well, reconstruction, democracy, and so on and so forth. Well, unfortunately, with each passing year, even during the construction of the museum, we were becoming aware that this view was unfortunately naive. And well, today, in 2026, we know that war is now just outside the borders of Poland, and something that had been unthinkable back in 2009. An attempt to change the borders, international borders in Europe by force has come back, and we are now experiencing the war in Central Europe. Again, the aggressive war of Russia against Ukraine.
Has the war in Ukraine changed the way perhaps the exhibition is being received by the audiences, or some elements of the exhibition? What influence did it have on the museum?
The final moment of the exhibition is a film which initially was supposed to show how the consequences of the Second World War in Central and Eastern Europe were overcome. I remember the initial outline would say that the film should show how Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia are being admitted to European Union and, for example, to NATO. So this break, when those countries were forcibly detached from Western democracies, would be thus filled. But with the wars in Middle East, the annexation of Crimea, and so on and so forth, we decided that this film should be different. Now it's an impression which shows how conflict and war are a constant thing, constant element of everyday life after the war, and it's becoming more and more menacing. So now the film, which was altered or supplemented because the museum is now open for 8 years, right? So this film is supplemented with scenes showing for example, annexation of Crimea, the Hamas attack on Israel, Israeli retaliation against Gaza, and of course the scenes from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The final scene now shows the destroyed theater in Mariupol, where there were children hiding in the basement. Despite that, the building was bombarded by Russia, and thus showing that conflict is nearby and more menacing.
And what would you like the visitors to take away from the exhibition?
Well, by seeing this exhibition, they should certainly learn first that, like I started our conversation, that memory of the Second World War in Poland, in Central and Eastern Europe, is way different than it is in the West. I do believe that Polish visitors should perhaps become aware that certain things which happen in Poland happen in other countries as well. That this was indeed the most devastating conflict in the history of mankind. I do believe that it's very important for the visitors to see that Poland, despite being overrun by two invaders and then occupied wholly by Nazi Germany, organized something totally unique, like Polish underground state. Which simply took place of the Polish statehood totally destroyed by both invaders and catered for the needs of the society, not only military operations of underground armies against the invaders, but also aspects like teaching, because the Nazi Germans wanted Poles to be educated, to be good slaves, so the mammoth task of educating the youngest in those difficult times were taken by clandestine teaching organizations run by the Polish underground state. And this is for visitors from the West. They should remember that in Central and Eastern Europe, 1945 was the day of liberation from the Nazi Germans, but it did not mean freedom. Sometimes people question the word liberation in Poland, but it has to be remembered that for those who were, for example, in concentration camps, it was indeed liberation, but from the Germans. But of course, the Red Army did not bring freedom, and for years and decades afterwards, Poland and other countries of Central and Eastern Europe were subjugated by imposed communist regimes. So the word liberation itself has a whole different meaning for those inhabitants of the Netherlands, for example, or France, where liberation meant return of the pre-war government and the building of democracy and welfare state and so on and so forth. Whereas in Poland, for example, it meant the persecution of the wartime heroes and imposition of alien ideological regime and another decades of subjugation.
And one last question before we go, and I'll need a short answer. What has surprised you the most in the way people respond to the exhibition?
Oh, surprised. I think the one early experience, I do believe that it was when I saw a school group where two young girls started to listen to a film about the so-called comfort women. So women which were forcibly or duped into becoming providing sexual services for Japanese army. And I took those girls away, found the teacher and told her that, well, are you aware that your young pupils will start to listen about stories where there will be a lot about rape, about forced sterilization, and so on and so forth? And the answer was, which showed how often we forget that war is terrible. They told me that they didn't think that such things will be in this exhibition. Which means that for many people, war remains a heroic story of heroic deeds and military prowess. Whereas war, even a victorious one, for some, for many, eventually for Poland, although after many decades, even a victorious war is terrible and brings about enormous sacrifice and gigantic trauma.
Jan Szkudliński, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching Pulse of Culture. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.